Tony Blair is back on the scene, chomping at the bit about Brexit, and so, for that matter, is Dan Wootton and Anne Widdicombe. And they pointed out there's a new poll showing support for rejoin Brexit, and Dan Wootton calls it and Tony Blair treacherous. Well, if the poll is suggesting a majority support rejoining Brexit, I don't see that Wootton can then turn around and say this is treacherous. Surely the point was that he claimed there was a majority support for Brexit in the first place, and that was not treacherous. If that changes, and unfortunately with politics, the public can be fickle, and polls change. This year, the Labour Party is in power. Next year, the Conservative Party is in power. The year after, something else is in power. If a majority wanted to leave, then you respect that majority. If a majority want to rejoin, then you respect that. You can't call it treachery. It's politics, Dan. And, you accept the decision. And there are two approaches now which seem to be adopted. One is to say that we didn't get the right Brexit, and that this particular government, led by a Brexiteer, Rishi Sunak, isn't doing the right thing. But it's probably true. And the second point, which we're now beginning to hear increasingly, is that rejoin would be too expensive. Well, that's also probably true. The costs of rejoining would be extraordinary, politically and economically. But the costs of remaining out of Europe might be too great as well. A drop in GDP, barriers to trade, the end of freedom of movement, the opportunities to career thugs who run the Home Office, the destruction of our good name in the interest of trade, in the interest of stopping the boats. It just gets more and more horrific. The cost of rejoining Europe might well be the ditching of the pound and the embracing of the euro, a new requirement. It might be the joining fee. So we pay for a divorce and we pay to rejoin. It may be, well, it almost certainly will be, the dumping and the extraordinary political complexity of dumping the recent legislation. Thank God there wasn't a bonfire of the legislation, or thank God that hasn't happened so far, because that would be another thing that would have to be unravelled. And part of the Brexiteer commitment of people like Rees-Mogg and Suella Braverman and Kerry Badenoch seems to be to make it as hard as possible to rejoin, because of the necessity of unravelling all that legislation. Not necessarily of giving us anything that is tangibly good, just making it incredibly difficult to untangle. Well, there is a solution, and Alexander the Great, Alexandros or Megas, had the solution. When faced with the Gordian knot, just take a sword to it and cut the whole thing in half. There is a point at which you just have to say, can't be bothered to untangle this rubbish. Let it go. And I'm afraid Brexit is something that we just have to cut away. It was a disaster.